fourth episode of this podcast. I'm sorry, fifth episode. Y'all know what it is better than me, hopefully. Well, we're going at least every week straight so far. Our goal is to get one coming out of every week. So we'll see how it goes. But y'all know how it starts, just beginning, breaking bread, talking about what's on our mind. So it's my turn today. So how you doing?
I'm doing good, man. One thing I found funny this week was a student of mine asked me, so Mr. Solis, your podcast, and I was like, what'd you say? Your podcast, are you guys going to talk about this and that? He was bringing up this extra credit opportunity I was providing my students by dissecting conversations between Dr. King, Malcolm X, and James Baldwin. And I'll go, first off, what podcast are you talking about? And he goes, the ones you do for the Historical Underground. I go, how do you know about that? I'm a member. Well, he's not a member in that he can attend the meetings, but he follows in the club and he gets all the announcements. And so he said he was watching the first episode, and I go, oh, okay. And I asked him, what'd you think about it? And he was like, well, it seems like you guys don't have a clear idea of what you're going to get into a lot, but it seemed kind of interesting. You were giving your philosophy on students and the education system. So I think he's still on episode 1. But they're cool. They're cool kids, and they're definitely they're jumping into it, and they're intrigued at the very least. So that's kind of cool. Like we're not just shooting off into the air, right, and no one's watching. Somebody's watching it. Kind of.
Yeah, that's interesting, man. Yeah, because we don't have any way of knowing, right? I mean, I wish we did. We're gonna level up here and there. Since this is just the beginning of our game, we'd love to hear feedback from anybody who gets a chance to listen. So I'm happy that some people are out there listening to what we got going on. Yeah, that is very interesting. I think that is very conversations from the underground-esque. We just kind of go with the flow, and that's one of our I think points that we tried to hit when we came up with this idea. Right? It's just shoot from the hip and see. It's more genuine and less staged. Get you in trouble sometimes, probably, because you end up saying things a little bit quicker than you get to think beforehand sometimes. But it is what it is, man. I've been enjoying it, at least. That's pretty cool, though, man. Yeah, I don't know. My semester's going pretty good. It's just crazy how fast it wraps up. It's crazy once you get into like November. It just feels like the semester just rushes through.
I know, man. We got like a couple weeks, and I'm just now hitting midterm, or so-called midterm, and I got all this grading to do, and then they're going to submit their PSAs, and then they got to take their finals, and I'm somehow going to be able to try to get them passed, into the civil rights movement, and it's like I'm running out of time, always running out of time.
Man. You talk a lot about James Baldwin in your civil rights movement? That's interesting, that conversation from the 3 you said that you're getting into.
Yeah, so I here's the thing is whether it's my 1301 class or my 1302 class, I will find a way to get Malcolm, Baldwin, and King in the mix. So even if it's my 1301 class, I'm going to have them explore the civil rights struggles of the 1960s. I don't care if it's like relevant or not. I don't care if it's in line. I don't care if it's on point with what we're covering at the moment, because I may not get them again. I may not have the luxury of having them for my 1302 class. As a matter of fact, many of them are asking, Mr. Solis, yo, you only have one 1302 class next semester. What do I do? And I go, you better take that class, or good luck. You can do one of 2 options. You can take my boy, Dr. B, or you can wait. And so that's the dilemma that they're currently dealing with.
Yeah, that's reshuffling the scheduling is really interesting, how much it's affecting students when they say they're supposed to be doing it for the benefit of the students. I'm not so sure that it's benefiting students at all. I don't know when they're going to start letting those people on the waiting list into the class.
That rarely happens. I mean, I don't know who benefits from the waiting list. I've never had students that.
Well, this is the first semester I've seen it. Have you noticed it on that scheduling? It says like space available, space is there. and this is the first time they've listed waiting lists. So for what I understand, they're going to be taking those students and putting them in other classes that need to make before they put them in ours, is what I thought. But I really don't know how it's going
Oh, I see what you're saying. Because of the new policies, how is
Yeah.
that going to affect? Got you. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've had students wait list for my class many times before, and rarely do they get in. Rarely.
Yeah, it's
Almost, they're probably not going to get in, is what I would say. Unfortunately, they got to wait. But I told them to take your class.
Yeah.
So you might have some good kids, going that way.
Yeah, only one I got that has anything open is 8 a.m. and a lot of people don't want to get up there that early.
Right.
I got two as well that's locked up with a couple of people on the waiting list. But
outside of that, I got that 1302 on Friday, and again, nobody wants to take a Friday class, and I get that. Yeah. And then outside of that, it's all 1301s. And then if my African American history class makes, which I don't think it's going to, but that is what it is, especially with the new parameters of meeting 75% enrollment by a certain date. Otherwise, they're going to cancel it.
Yeah.
Unless it's a specialty class, and in that case, the AA class counts. But getting back to
Zena had reached out to me and asked me if I wanted to do this Fellowship of African American Studies AP course.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to the first meeting on it. It's supposed to give me like a honorarium for reviewing all this material and then doing some surveys on what I think about it. And I was kind of like taken aback at first. The course starts with the African diaspora and goes all the way to the present day.
Okay.
And I just sort of was wondering why, African history doesn't begin in the diaspora. African history doesn't begin. Maybe I guess I would say that's fine if you're going to take it back to the movement of humans out of Africa 100,000 years ago or so. But I don't think that's what they mean. I think they sort of are implying transatlantic slave trade,
mm-hmm.
Or maybe the Mediterranean lands of Islam slave trade, which started a lot earlier, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. That just kind of hit me. I felt like a good topic at the beginning on civilization. What is civilization? And the debates between Eurocentrism and Afrocentricity and all that stuff about ancient civilizations, who gave civilization to who, would have been an excellent topic for an interdisciplinary course that you're trying to make, because it'll allow you to add all these other different elements of philosophy and debate and speech or whatever, man. But I don't know. I guess I'll be letting them know in my surveys.
I mean, thanks to the work that you and Dr. Koss did to set up the course.
Yeah.
And, due to y'all schedules, I was able to kind of fill the gap from time to time teaching the African American history course. From what I've understood, based on the text that I've been able to kind of mess with, is that, of course, there's history and civilization regarding Africa before the diaspora. However, if we were teaching a world civ course about Africa, or maybe a particular country in Africa, then of course we would delve deeper into the early civilizations before their interaction with Europe. However, because it's an African American history course, there's a tendency to only focus on those West African nations that traded directly into the transatlantic slave trade, or that were greatly affected by or greatly representative of the diaspora. And I think that's probably why they do that, or they start there. Like, it's not. I could see how. Let me give you an example. Like, when we teach U.S. history, we will. I do cover the Haitian Revolution.
Oh yeah.
In my U.S. history class. Definitely. And see, for us that's of course, for us that's a given, right? Now, do we talk about now? And this is where you and I might be different, because I bet you probably go into the Haitian Revolution and you're bringing in all these type of elements that would almost warrant a world civ explanation. However, because from the channel that I'm focusing on, which is U.S. history, I tend to talk about the Haitian Revolution, definitely what it is, but more importantly, how did it impact the United States? I'm going to talk about, to Saint Overture, I'm going to talk about what this meant on a world scale. But at the end of the day, it's a U.S. history class. So how does the Haitian Revolution impact U.S. history? That's pretty much, and the same thing with the French Revolution. The French Revolution has a significance and has value across the board. But yet at the end of the day, because I'm teaching a U.S. history class, what value does the French Revolution have on American history? And that's kind of how I take the reason as to why someone might start at the diaspora in regards to starting an African-American U.S. history course. I could see why they do that. I do appreciate your take on it. And I think I might, if my class makes, I would like to, maybe you can come in and do the first lecture, kick us off right. You know what I'm saying? Because your knowledge of the world is, so much more better. It's better than mine. And that maybe we should have a conversation where you and I could sit in the same room and we just chop it up with the students about what is a civilization, who imparted civilization upon who and when, and why that matters.
Yeah, man, we way past our 5 minutes, but I think we already got a pretty decent topic. Obviously, I think this is really leading me down because I want to respond to that.
Let's keep. Go ahead. Let's keep it here then.
I want to ask you specifically on how I include those two revolutions in U.S. history and why it's important as well, which I think we can frame in a broader sort of topic that took me back to our first point about why Malcolm, Baldwin, and King, all of which are African American heroes for a lot of people, brilliant minds for I would hope everyone who has a brain would be able to realize, but highly influential and successful people in African American history. And then we moved into this sort of other issue about where does African American history begin, and then framing U.S. history more broadly. How do we do that? I think all these kind of connect really well because, like, back to that point about the Haitian Revolution and the French Revolution. One of the reasons why I do talk about them a lot more in my world, Civ, ironically or strangely, through a topic on tea, which sparks off the revolutions. But in the U.S. History 1301 class specifically, in my early modern section, and towards the end of my American Revolution section of that course, I think it's important to know each of these revolutions very much because, I mean, for just straight off top speaking, physically, there were like 8,000 to 12,000 refugees, white ex-slave owners from Saint-Domingue who made their way to Philadelphia. And that was the United States' first refugee crisis, with all these people, white people, coming with these stories of the barbaric slaves who didn't let any white people escape. Yeah. How did you get there? Actually, if you read Jeremy Popkins' book, You Are All Free, a lot of African slaves were helping smuggle people out and giving them the opportunity to leave. And then you show up in the United States with all these scary stories of this hyper violent slave revolt that actually maybe didn't nearly have as much drama as the white folks like to claim that it was, right? And so that had a tremendous influence on the way U.S. Americans saw slaves, leading to laws clamping down on slavery in the United States. The United States made tremendous historical development based off their perceptions of what was going on in Saint-Domingue, right? And then the French Revolution, I mean, geez, you can't even go to a church in the North. These Congregationalists started every one of their sermons off with a new story of the violent nature of the French Revolution. Look what happens when you give lower class people power. They start putting babies on spikes and necrophilia and killing all these elite crazy mobs, killing all these elite people. We need to be careful and protect from mob rule, right? And so you got all these people thinking about the reign of terror and influencing their perceptions of government and laws that follow. And then, I mean, just even basically when the French Revolution ends, right? I mean, Napoleon sold the Louisiana territory to Thomas Jefferson. I think that's far more accurate than saying Thomas Jefferson bought this from Napoleon, right? Because Napoleon lost in Haiti, which he wanted to use to pump his sugar into the Louisiana territory and supply that area with sugar, which he couldn't do anymore. He didn't need it anymore. He needed some money to invade Egypt. He knew that he needed to divert the British's attention, so he gives it to the Americans at a steal, causes issues between the British and the Americans while he goes and tries to conquer the world, which he may have done if he didn't mess up and try to invade Russia, right? Because as I tell my students oftentimes, all road to world domination must go through Russia, and all roads to world domination end in Russia.
Fair enough. Yeah, man, something you brought up that was interesting is when you were talking about the French Revolution, and as the stories were, crossing the Atlantic into the Americas, that you could find in churches, many of the church leaders who at times were also, community leaders, political leaders. These church leaders are making reference to how, oh, look at the violence, look what happens with the angry mob, and this is why you should, trust us, trust our position. Also, you made reference to how they put baby heads on spikes in which they're attacking children. And I find that interesting because we look at, if you're not aware, I mean, everybody might be aware, and this may be, odd, but, we just had elections. And I'm driving up and down 35 between Dallas and Austin, and I see signs, billboards that are like, do you want to stop crime? Well, then vote for this political party.
Right.
Another one was like, do you want children to suffer? Then vote for this party or vote against that party. And it's so interesting that, like, even in 2022, the fear mongering of criminality and the threats against children still are, in the heartstrings of, like, not just American society, but I guess humanity. Like, we're always struggling, and we always use these examples as a way to stir up emotion and get people to act or think or feel a certain way about a subject.
Right. Even though that violence is going on all over and around you and your, frontier, treating all these Native Americans these certain types of ways, while you're stirring up fear about something over here. It diverts the attention from your own actions as well as you highlight the sensationalized propaganda or tools that kind of get people, riled up. You always got to be aware of this stuff in history. It's like you repackage the same things. I mean, for as much as history has changed who we are over time, there's still a strong core elements that get repackaged and just recirculated in different social settings. I think example of it, right?
Well, that's my point entirely with this, this whole notion of repackaging in certain settings. Like, again, the Haitian Revolution in world history has a different narrative than the Haitian Revolution in U.S. history. The French Revolution has a completely different narrative in a world civ class, as opposed to U.S. history class.
Right.
And I think that when, going back to the African American history, where you're doing the surveys or you're on panels and you're discussing this and that with Dr. Jackson, I guess if we're talking about the African American experience, the furthest back they may want to take it is the diaspora and West Africa.
It's interesting. It was like somebody reached out to Zena to ask her to be on there, and she just forwarded them to me and was like, "This is my expertise, so I'm offering this guy here." And then she also put Garrison on there, which
good.
I'm not sure. I think he teaches a sociology class that has, I
Oh
guess.
no, he does. Yeah, Garrison sociology, but he's
And because
tuned
it's
in, man.
interdisciplinary one, I think that's why she put two different names or something.
For sure.
But he wasn't in the meeting that I was in. I think you do it 2 different days, and they just showed us like these slides and told us everything, and then gave us a bunch of this information that we got to read to see what we think about the course that's going to be offered for AP is what it really is. So like student high school, we're going to finally get to take the class that we created, that we teach here. And back to what you said about this idea, this is always a problem. Is timing, right? I mean, we got 2 World Civ classes. We surely need 2 African American history classes. We got 2 Mexican American history classes. We need 2, and I think one of the guys who works with us, I guess, we're not in the loop very, very much outside the underground, but I think one of the guys who works with us split up that course and somehow got it to where we can now teach 1 or 2, or it's in the process of being made that way. I heard something like that at one of these previous meetings.
The African American history course?
Yeah, at the first week.
Good.
Back. When they had that thing where we're all supposed to be from different campuses, that one meeting, they had like an online one, and I showed up to the last like 20 minutes of it or so, and one of the guys who works for us said he did.
I heard that had been in discussions and in the works, and understandably so, it should be. It doesn't make any sense. You want me to go from? They want me to go from Africa to Obama. Like, I mean, that's crazy. And I like, how do you want me to do that in a semester?
Crazy. And I think that's one of the things in that meeting that the woman who responded to my inquiry about why we start with the diaspora said. It's hard to put all this stuff in together, which I agree, but just because something's hard don't mean it don't need to be done. Right. Just because something's difficult don't mean that you give up, you give up, or you just don't do it. You got to find a way. Until we split it up, you got to find a way to start with a unit. However depth you want to go is a different story. You don't necessarily go into depth about ancient Ethiopia or Aksum or the Kushite or the Egyptian pyramids. What you need to focus on is the struggle between Eurocentric beliefs in civilization and Afrocentric beliefs in civilization. You need to start with that book by Sheikh Diop called Civilization or Barbarism, which is a book I tell everybody you need to buy, because you can buy it for a few dollars on Amazon nowadays. It's a very cheap book. It's been around for a really long time. And you don't even need to really read all of it. You just need to kind of sift through and read some general aspects about it. You need to know who Diop is and the huge debates that go on between what we assert as his historical truth about civilization, the term civilization, where it comes from, who established it. Because if we can kind of get people to see that Africa had a rich, powerful legacy of human existence, even going back, well before, the sub-Saharan desert was a desert. And if we can talk a little bit about how some of these 19th century Europeans who show up in Africa, they have archaeological evidence of ancient civilizations all around them that they don't ever notice, because they're not there to notice that. They're there to, pillage mummies to make, medicinal concoctions they're going to, consume out of their bodies, or they're there to take resources and preach religion. And I think this is important because you start talking about perceptions and interpretations and how you see the world, which is central to the constructions that they establish when they get into the transatlantic slave trade, right? I mean, once they get into, taking Africans, they start making justifications about why they do that.
Here's a concern that I have, and not to interrupt too much, but like the notion that they constructed these. Well, Okay, so they're constructing a narrative. Was there a counter narrative provided?
Certainly, not in oftentimes by those who are, captured. Oftentimes have a hard time getting their voice recorded, right?
Well, no,
Some
no,
of
no. The other. So in the exchange of these slaves, you're going to have these, and we say they, the Europeans that are coming over to drop off goods, pick up slaves. They're constructing a narrative, right? And they're just, who are they? They're just slave traders. They're people that are on the ship.
Mhm.
There's not like this grand conspiracy of people that are perpetuating a narrative. They're just like, hey, this is what we're talking about. Here it is. This is what we're doing. Here it is. There's not this concerted effort to say, hey, look, we're engaged in this slave trade. We want to make sure that it's being perpetuated and articulated in this fashion. At the end of the day, it's just these individuals are articulating their perspective. My concern is, how is it that they're able to articulate said perspective and it be maintained? And we can make an argument, well, it's because they had access to this channel or that channel to express those views from the African front, as who they were trading with. And it doesn't have to be from the slaves themselves. It could have been from the slave traders. What narrative were they pushing of the slave trade? Or what narrative could they have expressed from the slave trade? Like, yes, I am trading slaves, but this is not something I would prefer to do, especially with Europeans, but this is the only way that I can survive, or whatever excuse it could probably come up with. My point is that, that when you have this narrative that's out there, how come there isn't an opposite or an opposing narrative?
That's a good question. I would say that, well, maybe let's back up a little bit and sort of give a general discussion about how the transatlantic slave trade operated, right? So, you got these Europeans who start to show up. They gain some technological understanding of travel through Chinese technology that came before them. They start hovering around the coasts of Europe and moving into the coasts of Africa, and then they eventually go, down all the way up, down Africa and up into the Indian Ocean, right? And they start finding these trade winds that kind of guide them towards west in the Atlantic Ocean, thinking perhaps that maybe it'll take them all the way around to China because they want to, take advantage of all these goods, right? All this trade and the spice trade and the Silk Road, and hard time kind of getting those routes functionable with all the struggles between Christians and Muslims going on, right? So they start heading out that way. They find this new world area. They encounter all these Native Americans who have no resistance to diseases that just continue to die. If they don't die, they know the land pretty well, so they have a good tendency to defend themselves. And meanwhile, Europeans have been interacting with Africans for quite some time without a real racial complex being developed necessarily. They usually trade on the coasts. They have to deal with African kings who set the parameters of trade. They can't go into the heart of Africa. A lot of people don't realize the fact that the first white man doesn't cross the whole continent that we know of until, well into the 19th century, after this trade's been going on for centuries, right? And the people that they're taking from Africa, I think that's key to determine the narrative that forms. Like, the people that they're taking from Africa have usually already survived a 1,000-mile trek across the desert.
Right.
They're already wiped out pretty badly. 10% of them die across the Atlantic Ocean, but a lot higher percentage of them died getting to that ocean in the first place, right? And they're revolting on these ships quite regularly. There's tremendous amount of money to be made in the need for labor once they find cash crops like sugar working really well and tobacco working really well in the new world, right? And so as they begin trading with Africans for bodies, they also begin to kidnap who they can to get some extra bodies that they toss into these middle passage ships, right? They take them across the Atlantic, they sell them, and they keep doing all of this stuff. And some people see the brutality of this. James Newton himself, who was a slave trader, felt guilty about it when he thought he was about to die on a ship one day and it was raining, and he gets down on his knees and prays to God, it saved me right now and I'll never do this again. And he apparently says the sun came out and the song Amazing Grace came to his mind. And that's how we got this song Amazing Grace. There's people, I mean, that was like 16th century. People been doing this, been criticizing it for a while. But a lot of people don't criticize it. They got the money to be made. And so what do? What happens when people are criticizing your industry? You dress it up and you make it seem sweet. You make it look good. Or you try to mask the problems. And so the narrative begins with this beastly savagery, uncivilized, no religion, no history coming from this dark continent, right? And in order to make sure our students don't fall into that trap, I think it's important to start with a good discussion about where that narrative came from. Like Philip Ulrich has his book, American Negro Slavery, which is just full of all this nonsense that in the 1920s they were arguing. We don't necessarily need to go to the ancient stuff. We can start with a topic about these arguments. Then we can kind of pull in a little bit of ancient stuff to sort of combat that narrative. There have been people combating that narrative for a long time, right? Carter Woodson was, Du Bois. I mean, these people have, but they tend to stay in certain communities. And when we want to do a public education system to provide everybody with these different narratives, it's more about, these narratives have been going on for a while. It's just more about making sure that the students get to see them both.
For sure. And I know that these opposing narratives exist. I mean, as early as Prince Henry the Navigator, when they were bringing their first slaves in from Africa, you had some of his scribes documenting how horrific the sounds and the yells and the cries were as these slaves were like trying to figure out where in the world they were, right. Shouting up into the sky. My concern is that like there doesn't seem to be like this. There's no concentration of opposition narrative. And don't get me so for example, we may have one person say this is wrong here. We have what's his name, Bartolome de la Casa. He'll say it over here. Right. We'll have that scribe in Henry Navigator or Prince Henry the Navigator's court say it over here. But we don't have this collective effort, or what it comes across is like for the justification of the enslavement of Africans. Apparently, there's this narrative that they are barbarous, they are savages, they are this and that, and there's this collective narrative that is being pushed. I always wonder, like, where is the counter narrative to that? Where was the collection of good voices that we don't often hear about? In the same vein that, if we have individuals that are pro-slavery in the United States, we'll have the abolitionist movement. Not just one person fighting against slavery here, not just one person fighting against slavery over there, or voicing their disagreements with slavery. Vermont as early as the 1770s or whatever. But as a state, but where is this collective opposition narrative, and how is it drowned out to such a degree that we do have students and we do have people that fall into the trap of this singular narrative? Like, I always wonder what happens to those.
Yeah, maybe it's good. It's this term cultural hegemony that I like to think about a lot. That Antonio Gramsci, who's kind of like a neo-Marxist kind of dude, coined, which I really like. That to me, that term sort of reflects how large structures or societies develop these narratives that naturally drowned out opposing narratives because of how powerful and well equipped they make a society to shift and solidify a certain way, or move a certain way, or believe, accept a certain kind of thing. You know, you got these aspects of a society that fit really powerfully for people to gain control, and cultural hegemony kind of leads you down this path of accepting certain narratives without really questioning others.
So so are we then validating this notion that they're able to sell their nonsense better than we are?
Yeah,
because I think about that all the time politically. When I look at even in today's politics, when we're dealing with anything that's controversial, or where the country could be divided 50-50 either way, it becomes apparent that no matter what type of facts you're spitting, what type of evidence is available, there's a narrative that is believed and pushed, and people find I'm almost flabbergasted how easily people find themselves believing in something like that, despite this evidence, despite these facts. And I'm like, what are they selling? I know what they're selling is nonsense. They're selling their narrative, right? But it seems like they're better salesmen. Like they're pushing some type of they're pushing a product I know is nonsense, but the way they're pushing it seems to attract more followers, more believers, or they're easier to confuse or convince.
Let's just take our own examples. I mean, do your students tend to follow? I feel like I don't ever really get much pushback when I talk about what I talk about. I hear about a lot of people getting pushed back, but
I don't think
question me.
Yeah, I don't think a person like yourself wouldn't get a lot of pushback because you're seen as the authority in the room, and of course you can handle yourself intellectually, and more often than not, when you speak with a little bit of confidence, and it comes with ease, there's a tendency to believe, oh well, it sounds like he knows what he's talking about, so it's got to be true.
Right.
And my thing about that, for you, obviously that makes sense. But what I'm talking about is, we know the facts are false, like whatever these people are pretending to be facts. And especially, again, this narrative of, well, Africans are savages, they're backwards, they're not civilized, and then these are the justifications to enslave them. And so if that's a narrative that's being pushed, like, how is that so easily believed? My answer is that, is it so easily believed because we did not provide a proper counter narrative?
No, I think it's easy to believe because you always have a tendency to accept that which falls under your own self-interest or your own connections. People have a tendency to highlight the brutality of others, maybe.
But here's the thing: people don't have a self-interest into slavery. Not many people were readily associated with the institution of slavery. They were sold this story. They're being sold a story. And you said it was like, well, if it's not their own economic interest, which most people didn't have an economic interest in slavery. 75% of Southerners never owned slaves, right? So they're told a lie that they need to fight for other people's property, and then that's somehow going to make their lives better. That's the grand.
This is good. So this is where I could bring in the term cultural hegemony again. So let's imagine those slaveocracies, those who owned, 2% of all enslaved or slave owners owned 80% of all slaves, right? So here's what I mean when I say cultural hegemony. They got the power, they got the influence, and they got the keys to the city, right? Because they got all the power. Cultural hegemony is what comes from this top down, right? So they develop these things like Southern honor, which gets you to be acting a certain kind of way, or white supremacy, which gets you to be acting a certain kind of way, because you like it. Like, look at any stupid old thing anybody can do, man. Anybody with fashion, you go do some weird looking thing, and then everybody's like, "Oh, I want to do this." Why? I don't know. Remember that dude Bill Burr talking about that water bottle flipping? He's like, all of a sudden, everybody's like, "Oh, I want to flip this water bottle and put it on the right."
Right.
Why? Oh, because it's so cool. Like, you just start falling in line when movements kind of happen, and the culture.
But my thing is, why can't we provide an opposing opposite, even if it's a goofy line? Like, why can't we present the bottle flipping then? Why is it they are presenting the bottle flipping?
Well, because they got more power.
But they don't have more power. In the South, they do. Yeah. You're telling me that there aren't equally rich people that might oppose the institution, that could have said something? They chose not to.
But then we got to get into the fact that slavery, and there were a lot of Northerners invested in the slave trade, dog. Like, when the Civil War broke out, so many of these people opposed it because they made tremendous amounts of money off that cotton situation.
The ones in power. So this is so you're right. This is a hierarchical power issue that trickles down,
which can bring us back to Malcolm, Baldwin, and King. Like, look at their narratives. Look what they tried to say. Look what they told. It was powerful. It still is very powerful. There are people who buy into it for sure and follow it, but we still got so many of these people in charge that want to undermine it. I mean, look at what DeSantis says about some of the things that Malcolm, Baldwin, and King would have talked about. DeSantis is the legacy of the guys who were combating what Malcolm, Baldwin, and King were trying to say in the 60s. And we maybe are still trying to get the other message out. But these people who are complaining about talking about slavery, about how they automatically go to this idea that we're trying to make white students feel guilty about themselves. If we even have a discussion about slavery, the first thing that they say is, "Oh, it's what you're trying to say, that one race is better than the other and one race is guilty." Like, that's what you got to take from us, starting with a conversation about the brutality of an institution that built this country. Like, that's where you want to go with it. That's where they were going with it back then when they responded to when King responded to the clergy with the letter of Birmingham jail, right? He was responding to that minimalizing nature of even people who would consider themselves good people, like those white clergy would have thought. They still existed in this cultural hegemony that undermined blackness for a long time, that gave them a sense of comfort about their place in the world. And I think all three of these people who we're talking about stood up in different ways against that.
For sure. And what's interesting is you have Malcolm, who's going to stand up against the system, utilizing what elevated the American system, which was white nationalism. And so Malcolm will argue for black nationalism. He's very pro-capitalistic, very pro-self-investment, very transcendentalistic. And then you have somebody like King, who's, closeted socialist, but then later on in his career, he makes it very clear that he believes in giving power to the people, representing the poorer class or representing the underclass, lower class, by means of elevating them, redistributing wealth. And then Baldwin, I have a lot of students that they've never heard of him, and then the moment they do watch the interview or they read some of his work, they're like, I don't know who this guy is, but he seems to make more sense. Like, he's in between the two somehow.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we don't get to delve deeper into that unless it's in my African American history class. But
I would say, for me, Baldwin is the true intellectual above all three on a whole nother level, who can speak so eloquently and profoundly about the lived experiences of being black at that time. Right. I think Malcolm was more hot-headed in public than Baldwin was. I think Malcolm was more this power figure, this strengthly masculine figure, about combating by any means necessary the fire of white supremacy with maybe Black nationalism.
Yeah.
I don't know too much extent that I would call him a capitalist, although I do, investment in Black. I think maybe there was an attempt to sort of go further later on. I think if Malcolm wasn't assassinated when he was assassinated, that he may have ended up joining the Black Panther movement, perhaps, if survived, which would have been very communistic, anarchist kind of capitalism, maybe. And I think King, was more of a religious figure than Malcolm, even though Malcolm had that religiosity about him early on. He was more of a compassionate critic of society, trying to figure out how to get included. But all three of them, I think, talked about the brutality of slavery and the effects that it had on Blackness. I mean, one of the keys that always blew my mind about Baldwin, man, is he over there say, "I hate watermelon to this day. Makes me sick because of the way it's portrayed, these racial stereotypes of Black people." And that's always been something so powerful to me. Like, look how racism can make someone hate something as delicious as watermelon. That can't possibly be bad. That can't possibly taste bad to anybody, but it's going to make racism is going to make that physically make you ill. Racism is so powerful that it can make you hate something so sweet. And not very many people could do that way.
One thing with Baldwin is that he had a way to articulate you said it like perfectly, the lived experience of a Black man in America who's also not struggling, but figuring out how to delicately maybe, be an openly gay man, which could be difficult at that time as well. But outside of that, you got these three individuals. I got a quote already for it just to kind of sum it up and wrap it up. And the quote is, it's never 100% of one thing, it's 1% of 100 things. And there's a tendency for us to try to find a savior who's 100% everything we need. And in this particular movement, and I think the success of almost every movement, it's never just one thing, it's everybody playing their position. King was playing his position. X was playing his position. Baldwin was playing their position. And with all these movements in part, and I didn't even bring up all the females that contributed to the civil rights movement because there's so many to name. That's neither here nor there. But my point is that so many players are playing different parts, and that's usually when you get something done. That way we don't single out one particular group or organization to solving a problem that is as massive as racism in the United States.
Right on, man. Let me add my quote with that too, because it fits pretty well with what we're talking about. And mine's from James Baldwin. And I think it also kind of ties in a little bit about why we need to go back to the early civilizations unit in that class. And it says, history is not the past. History is the present. We carry our history with us. James Baldwin. I think we have to think to some degree, there's this trap, right? Presentism can be a problem in history, but you shouldn't shy away from presentism in history out of fear that it may corrupt your understanding of the past. You can do two things at once. You can tease out the value of presentism in history by also being true to the past. And I think that Baldwin quote hits me with that. And also, by the way, Baldwin survived too, way longer than the rest.
Some way.
Miraculously somehow.
Well, he's not always, I was going to say, he's not always in the States.
Yeah, that's true. He spent a lot of time.
it's easy to survive U.S. violence when you ain't in the U.S.
Yeah.
Maybe.
For real. For real. Right on, man. All right. Sounds good.
That's about it, man. We finished it up.
Good episode. We'll catch up.
All right. See you next time.
Next time.